Producing a tie-in video game for a licensed property comes with many pros and cons. On the upside, the established property you're working with comes with a ready-made audience and mass appeal that makes marketing a snap. On the downside, you don't have full ownership of your own work, and you're subject to the often mercurial whims of whatever company controls the property. Perhaps that's why licensed games have a bit of a reputation for being rubbish. In the most extreme cases, developers may find themselves losing their established license entirely, whether it's due to failed negotiations, broken contracts, or just bad luck. This can actually end up working to their advantage, however, as long as they're able to salvage the work they've already done and turn it into something original. Some of these twists of fate are simple curiosities, while others would go on to have rippling ramifications across the entire gaming industry. And some are just downright bizarre when you find out what they were supposed to be. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that were surprisingly almost licensed. Number 10, Mortal Kombat. Fighting games were a hot-ticket item in the arcades of the 90s, due in large part to the many successes of Street Fighter. And this left many companies just trying to catch up. It was around this time that some of the developers at Midway had an idea for their own fighter based around ninjas, which would automatically make it one of the best games ever, probably. The higher-ups had different plans, however, as they were attempting to pursue the video game rights for Universal Soldier, an upcoming film that would star the extremely bankable Jean-Claude Van Damme. When that deal ultimately fell through, the team repitched their fighting game idea, and the bosses, probably swayed by the giant stacks of money that Street Fighter II was making at the time, agreed. And thus, Mortal Kombat was born. And even though the roster wasn't entirely ninjas, it still ended up being a massive success in its own right. For one reason or another, Van Damme still ended up having an influence on the game, as can be seen in the design of Mortal Kombat mainstay Johnny Cage. And in the distant future, he would end up becoming playable in a Mortal Kombat game himself. Coincidentally, Van Damme would also end up starring in a movie based on Street Fighter, because time truly is a circle. Number 9, Perfect Dark. Imagine that you're a video game studio that has just released a critically acclaimed first-person shooter based on one of the most recognisable film franchises of all time. What do you do next? If you said, do the same thing again, well, you'd be half right. This was the situation that the developers at Rare found themselves in after their James Bond tie-in, GoldenEye 007, had won them a mountain of accolades. With another Bond film only a couple of months away at that point, Rare immediately set to work on a sequel to their own masterpiece. During pre-production, however, they found themselves outbid for the James Bond license by their competitor Electronic Arts, and had to scrap most of the work they'd already done. They apparently weren't too fussed about the affair though, as they felt they'd already spent enough time in the world of 007, and the team was keen to make something new. That something new ended up being Perfect Dark, another first-person shooter for the Nintendo 64 that built on what Rare had already done with GoldenEye and further revolutionised the shooter genre on consoles with both excellent single-player campaign and multiplayer deathmatch modes. As for the Bond game that Electronic Arts published, well, let's just say they had a very tough act to follow. Number 8, Journey to Silius. Normally, when a game studio acquires a license to another property, it's customary to send the owner of that property regular updates on your game, so they can give approval on any decisions you make. But some people prefer to do things their own way. The game we know today as Journey to Silius began life as a game based on the first Terminator movie, and was even announced as such at a video game trade show by developer Sunsoft. Previews of this licensed prototype spread in the form of a promo video and in the pages of Nintendo Power magazine. The project went through several overhauls during development. Originally, it was conceptualized as a cinematic adventure game in the style of Dragon's Lair that would guide players through the events of the movie, but eventually morphed into a platformer that would function as a prequel set in the distant future. I really hate time travel sometimes. Upon seeing the finished product, the movie distributors didn't approve of how far the game had diverted from the events of the movie, and Sunsoft's license was revoked. Hastily slapping on a fresh coat of paint over the whole thing, they were able to release the game after rebranding it as an original IP. An unfortunate turn of events, but at least their hard work didn't end up getting terminated. Number 7, Dynamite Cop. In the mid-90s, Sega found itself with a problem on its hands: a surplus of arcade machine parts and not enough games to use them for. Fortunately, they had also just acquired the license for the hit 80s action film Die Hard, which provided the perfect setup for the classic arcade beat-em-up. Fittingly titled Die Hard Arcade, the game was hugely popular and a very profitable cash-in on its recognisable characters. For all its success, however, Sega was unable to release the game as it was in Japan, since they only had a license to Die Hard in the West, and thus they released a reskinned version called Dynamite Cop in the East. The game was popular enough to spawn a sequel, but by the time it rolled around, Sega's Die Hard license had expired everywhere, leading them to adopt the game's Japanese title internationally. So when Japan received Dynamite Cop 2, the rest of the world got the same game as just Dynamite Cop, even though it was technically Die Hard 2. Sure, the main character bears a suspicious similarity to Bruce Willis, but his name's Bruno, so that makes it completely different, right? Number 6, Doom. So far on this list, we've mostly heard about projects that fell through due to legal red tape or botched agreements. But when you hear about a studio that had the rights to exactly what they wanted and simply chose to give it up, well, that could only be the work of id Software. For those unaware, id Software were the rock stars of the gaming industry back in the 90s, as they were responsible for classic games like Wolfenstein, Quake, and of course, Doom. After finishing work on Wolfenstein 3D, the team wanted to do something different, and started envisioning a fast-paced, high-intensity shooter with a science fiction setting. Many of the team were fans of the movie Aliens, and were clearly taking notes from it for their work on the new game. At one point, the team even managed to attempt to acquire the Aliens license to make the game an official tie-in, and even got so far as to have a meeting with an executive at 20th Century Fox, the film's distributor, who seemed on board with what they were pitching. Ultimately, the team at id decided not to go through with the Alien concept, as they would have had to sacrifice their creative control over the finished product. Instead, they swapped out the extraterrestrials of the movie for demons as the game's main enemy, and the rest, as they say, is history. Number 5, Darkstalkers. There are a few different stories from the creators of Darkstalkers about how the series came about. According to the first game's art director, someone suggested to him the idea of a fighting game with monsters, which he passed along to the game's lead planner. According to the lead planner, the idea came up in a brainstorming session. Wherever the idea of a monster fighting game came from, producer Alex Jimenez, a self-professed superfan of old horror movies, decided to pitch the idea to Universal, the film studio responsible for the classic black and white creature features like Dracula and Frankenstein. Universal decided to pass on the idea, but fortunately, Jimenez never really needed the license from them in the first place. While they were unable to use the vintage Hollywood depictions of these monsters, there was nothing stopping the developers from just making their own Dracula, Frankenstein, and Wolfman designs that would eventually evolve into the beloved super cartoony cast of Darkstalkers. In the years since, there have been loads of monster-themed fighting games, though never any bearing the Universal trademark. Thank the stars for the law of public domain. Number 4, Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. Sometimes, two things that appear suspiciously similar on the surface are simply the victims of coincidence. Two takes on the same idea that just happen to appear at the same time. Sometimes, though, there's a little bit more to the story than that. Since its inception, the Warcraft series of video games has been compared by fans and critics to the long-running tabletop strategy game Warhammer. Confusingly similar names aside, both share a high fantasy setting, tactical gameplay, and a similar aesthetic. And that's not entirely by accident, as the developers at Blizzard were big fans of Warhammer and took a healthy dose of inspiration from the game when working on Warcraft. There was a push within the company to make it an officially licensed game, but this fell through for a few reasons. First, the creators of Warhammer, Games Workshop, would have retained ownership and control of the game, and the devs at Blizzard were just too invested in their project to give that up. And secondly, the team had previously had bad experiences working with licenses in the past, and weren't keen on reliving that. Negotiations never went far, and Blizzard ultimately stuck it out and made Warcraft the way they wanted to, as a wholly original franchise that would go on to be one of the most successful of all time. Number 3, Pax Corpus. Cryo Interactive was a video game studio known for making beautiful worlds and odd gameplay choices. Aeon Flux was an animated series known for its avant-garde style and thought-provoking stories. Putting the two together sounds like a match made in, well, maybe not heaven, but somebody's fever dream, maybe. Everything seemed to be in order when the gaming division of Viacom, the owners of Aeon Flux, commissioned Cryo to adapt the series into a game for the PlayStation and PC. Development seemed to go smoothly, and a beta version of the game was even shown off at the 1996 E3 conference. Trouble struck at the 11th hour, however, when Viacom acquired Virgin Interactive and merged it with their own gaming division, leading to all projects in development being cancelled. Left with a mostly complete game, but no permission to release it, Cryo scrambled to change the names and story in something that was just legally distinct enough to be put on store shelves. Now called Pax Corpus, the game launched in 1997 to such glowing praise as, like Tomb Raider but crap. Many people apparently missed the memo on the game's development, as publications continued to report on the supposed release of the Aeon Flux game, not realising they'd already played it. Number 2, Donkey Kong. Seeing the alternate timeline where any of these games ended up being the licensed project they could have been would be interesting, but if there's any that could have rewritten the course of gaming history completely, it was Donkey Kong. The development of the classic arcade game has practically become myth at this point, but according to legend, it began when Nintendo of America ordered a surplus of arcade cabinets for the game Radar Scope, only for it to bomb horribly. In desperation, the company needed to create a quick conversion kit for the cabinets to recoup its losses, and looked inward for new ideas. At the same time this was all happening, Nintendo was also pursuing the license for Popeye, the classic comic strip about a spinach-loving sailor. It was only due to delays with the licensing and the need for a quick turnaround that the conversion project went in a different direction, as Nintendo decided to make something with original characters that could be reused for future projects, which is perhaps the greatest understatement of all time. Nintendo would end up releasing a Popeye game only a year later, and there are traces of its influence in the design of Donkey Kong's iconic characters, but if it weren't for a few mishaps in management, the biggest name in gaming might never have been born. And number 1, Flashback. For a fun little guessing game, try and see if you can figure out what classic movie this game was originally supposed to be based on. Flashback, originally developed for the Amiga and Mega Drive, is a cinematic puzzle platformer and considered one of the masterpieces in the genre, receiving critical acclaim for its design, incredibly smooth animations, and its gripping sci-fi tale of a man fighting against an intergalactic alien conspiracy. In the years since, it has become the best-selling French video game of all time and has made frequent appearances on lists of the greatest games ever. It almost had a very different legacy, however, as the concept was originally pitched for a project based on a movie license the publisher had acquired. And what movie was that? Something like Blade Runner or They Live, perhaps? Nope, it was none other than The Godfather. Yes, this planet-hopping space adventure was originally planned to be a game based on the mafia crime drama, but reimagined in a distant future setting. However, this version of the game didn't get too far before it was nixed, due to straying a tad too far from the source material. I just can't imagine what part they could have possibly had an issue with.